Lombroso was the first person to examine crime as a discrete subject and also pioneered the study of women and crime. And both he and Ottolenghi were interested in what they called then scientific policing, which is early forensics as we would know them. And Ottolenghi later went on actually to found the first school of forensic science in the world, and that was in Rome in the very early 20th century. So Lombroso was appointed as a professor of legal medicine and public hygiene at the University of Turin in 1876. And having read some of his work, I soon became fascinated, not just by his theories, but also the man himself, because he was a real character. He was argumentative, opinionated, unafraid of controversy, something of a showman. He would draw large crowds of the general public whenever he gave lectures. And he soon became one of the most well-known and prominent thinkers in Italy. And his best-known works, around which I loosely based the novels, were Criminal Man and later Criminal Woman, The Prostitute and the Normal Woman. Well, Lombroso has been mentioned in a few literary works. He pops up in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Stoker uses Lombroso's criminal characteristics to describe Dracula's physical appearance, with his aquiline nose, like that of a bird of prey, bushy eyebrows that meet over the nose, and pointed ears, all of which you can see in this very good illustration there. We also see mentions in Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agent, and also Tolstoy and Zola drew on Lombroso's work for their novels as well. But I wanted to take things a step further and actually use Lombroso as a character, along with his two assistants. And one of the things that I learned when studying creative writing was that a sense of place is a potent thing in storytelling. So I knew I needed to visit Turin and do some research. So all I knew about Turin at that stage was, well, here we are. Here's a selection of things that I knew. The Winter Olympics of 2006, two football teams, Juventus and Torino FC, lots of rivalry between them. Fiat cars, of course, the Italian job, the work of the Italian horror film director Dario Argento, and of course the famous Turin Shroud. But I wanted to go a bit more deeply into Turin than that, of course. So I began to look at the history of Turin, and it's a turbulent one. It begins as a small settlement, which was established by the Taurini tribe. Taurus, Latin for bull, of course, Tau, Celtic for mountain. But this settlement was razed to the ground by Hannibal in 218 BC on his famous journey by elephant across the Pyrenees and the Alps to Rome. Julius Caesar eventually rebuilt the settlement and used it as a base for his conquest of Gaul. And in 25 BC, the Emperor Augustus founded Turin's predecessor, which was Augusta Tarinorum. Some of the city's Roman past still remains in Turin. You can see on the bottom right of the screen the Porta Palatino, and they are the Roman gates to the city. In the past, it's been a private residence, as well as a women's prison, interestingly. But today, it's an archaeological park that's open to the public to walk around and enjoy. Well, after the fall of the Roman Empire, Turin was invaded and occupied by Germanic tribes, the Ostrogoths, later the Lombards, until it became eventually the capital of the Savoy's expanding kingdom. And over the centuries, the city grew in size and splendour. In 1536, the French occupied the city. But in 1563 to 4, Turin was re-established as the Savoy capital. And I wanted to say a little bit about the Turin Shroud. In 1578, it came from Chambéry to Turin. I'm assuming you know what it is, but just in case, the piece of linen it is that's showing an image of a man with marks of the crucifixion, said to be part of the burial cloth of Jesus. Well, today this is kept in a chapel in the Cattedrale di San Giovanni, or Duomo, which opened in 1498. The building itself is, well, it's designed by a Tuscan, Settignano. I would say it's probably not it's not a particularly beautiful, or certainly not now, or accomplished architectural achievement if you compare it to others in the city. It's quite a sober sort of building. It's perhaps appropriate given what it houses, the shroud, but it's preserved, the shroud, in a silver coffer, which is kept at the centre of a black marble altar embellished with gilt, and it's not usually on public show. There's a replica that's there for the public to look at. This coffer, obviously it's a very precious item. It's locked with 7 keys. And in fact, in 1997, as you probably know, there was a fire in which, potentially it could have been destroyed. Fortunately, it wasn't, it was saved. The shroud has been venerated by Pope Francis. That doesn't mean that the Catholic Church has confirmed its authenticity. They prefer to leave it as a matter for scientific debate, which is still ongoing. And the pandemic, of course, as in so many other areas, did bring about some changes. This Easter, the shroud was at the heart of a liturgy broadcast online, and this is the second time this has happened, therefore reaching a worldwide audience via social media. Back to the history of Turin then. After repeated invasions by the French, finally in 1802, Napoleon annexed Piedmont to France, and the city's walls were torn down. In 1815, after the fall of Napoleon, Turin, though, was returned to the Savoys. And following the Piedmontese Revolution in 1821, there's much turmoil until Italy is finally unified at the Risorgimento in 1861. Turin became Italy's first capital city. This, I'm afraid, lasted only until 1864, when it was moved to Florence, and then from Florence to Rome, where, of course, it still is. The city is geographically really rather interesting. It lies on the west bank of the River Po in the region that will become Piedmont in the Middle Ages. So it's Pedemontium in Latin, the land at the foot of the mountains. And the peaks of the Alps, as you can see in the photograph there, loom over the city, almost like a guardian angel, creating a magnificent backdrop when they're not shrouded in fog and cloud, which I'm afraid they often are. Turin has always been something of a gateway into Italy for armies, for pilgrims, and of course now these days for tourists inexplicably wanting to go skiing. That's just me, my prejudices. The city itself shows its Roman origins. It's built on a grid-like structure. There are, of course, older sections with winding alleyways and older buildings. And running through the city is, as you see here, the River Po, with on one side the Marazzi, that's the top picture there, which are boat sheds that are carved into the riverside. Incidentally, the scene of one of the murders in City of Devils. Couldn't resist. On the other side rise the hills of Monferrato, sloping down to the river. If you take a walk there, you can see beautiful, beautiful villas with gardens and vineyards, providing relief from the hot summers for the wealthy, then and now, I imagine. A particular landmark is the Basilica of Superga, designed in the early 1700s by the architect Filippo Juvara, who was commissioned to design a building that would celebrate the Savoy dynasty. It's an imposing construction, elegant bell towers, a dome that overlooks Turin. It was, I'm afraid, the scene of a more recent tragedy, and this is very sad, in 1949, when in terrible weather, a plane crashed very near to the basilica, killing all members of the Torino football team on their way home because they were having a friendly match in Lisbon. So very, very sad. And there's a memorial within the basilica to them. Well, of course, I was not the first writer to visit the city. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche stayed there from 1888, and during his time there, he produced some of his finest work. But his stay also famously ended, rather tragically, with his descent into madness in early 1889, while embracing a horse in the Piazza Carlo Alberto. And he never really wrote anything after that, although he lived, I think, for about 10 or 11 years afterwards. But he described the city in a spirit of high excitement when he first arrived. He said that one can see from the middle of the town the Alps covered with snow, that the roads seem to run so dead straight into their midst, the air dry, sublimely clear. I never believed a town could become so beautiful through light. One can walk for half hours at a stretch under high vaulted passageways. Everything here is tall and broad in scope, so that the centre of the town has a proud feeling of freedom. I walk these stately streets with delight. Where else do they have such pavements? A paradise for the feet. And you can see here underneath the photograph of Nietzsche, those high vaulted passageways in the Via Po, where the actually older parts of the University of Turin are. It's possible to walk along for miles along those passageways, doing some window shopping, stopping for coffee, a bite to eat or a drink. And the great thing is, it's sheltered both from the heat of the summer, which can get quite intense, and also the rain, which is abundant because of the city's position in the shadow of the Alps. One of the first things I actually noticed on my very first visit there was that we kept bumping into street vendors who were selling umbrellas, which is never a good sign. And it did actually rain for most of the time. The author Henry James also spent a little time in Turin, and when he writes of the city following his brief visit in 1872 on his way from Chambéry to Milan, it's highly evocative of the place. To enter Turin then of a lovely August afternoon was to find a city of arcades, of pink and yellow stucco, of innumerable cafes, of blue-legged offices, of ladies draped in the North Italian mantilla, the massive medieval castello in mid-piazza with its shabby rear and its pompous Palladian front, the brink campaniles beyond, the milder yellower light, the range of colour, the suggestion of sound. Well, of course, by this point, my anticipation was at a very high level. I was, I confess, a little bit disappointed initially when we sat in the taxi from the airport and drove through the city's industrial and then suburban outskirts. And it's often the way, isn't it, when you're visiting a city for the first time, and usually the airport is way out of the city. So that was my experience, but it wasn't too long before the landscape changed dramatically, and I started to see both Nietzsche and Henry James Turin more clearly. Well, not surprisingly, the first thing that struck me about the city was its architecture. Most people think of Turin as an industrial city, and of course that's true to an extent, but it is also, in my character, James Murray, in his words, it's full of Baroque architecture and broad shining streets full of grand palazzos. Everywhere I go, I see fine sculptures and ornate fountains, and there are museums and galleries around every corner. Well, there are so many buildings of note that I can really only pick out a few examples just to give you a flavour. Here you see the Palazzo Carignano, built by Guarini for a Savoy prince in the 17th century, unusually using brick rather than stone. And that was in order to achieve a living and a pulsating essence, like a wave breaking through the horizon. So again, as James observes in City of Devils, it was curved like a series of waves. And in the light of the torches that lit the building's entrance, the terracotta walls seemed to be undulating gently, almost as if they were a living entity. He looked up at the windows. Most of them were surrounded by mouldings that were so cleverly carved, they looked like folds of cloth. So the Piazza San Carlo is probably the best example of a royal square, an imitation of French architecture of the time. It was designed around 1620, built 17 years later over the remains of a Roman amphitheatre. And it includes in the piazza two churches, sort of set in symmetry. It's the San Carlo and Santa Cristina. And last but not least is the Palazzo Madama, which is built in the Middle Ages on the site of the Eastern Roman Gate to the city, but it's been added to over the centuries. So there is, for example, an early 17th century facade, which is designed by the royal architect Filippo Guevara, based on models of French classicism, and you can see that there. So this is the Turin where my story was set in 1888, a few years after the new Italy was established. Turin may not have been the capital anymore, but there was plenty of culture and learning at its heart, particularly at the University of Turin, where Lombroso worked. So Lombroso was, as his daughter Gina would later describe him, a born collector. Lombroso began to assemble artifacts when he was still a student himself in the 1850s. And these included, as you can see here, skulls and brains and other pickled body parts, death masks, museum crates full of examples of prisoners' art, all of which he brought with him to Turin, kept in his house there. He had a number of skeletons that he had propped up against a wall in his hallway in his home, and his children used to play with them, apparently. I don't know what his wife thought about that, his wife Nina, but eventually, no doubt to her relief, he moved all of these items to his laboratory at the University of Turin. In 1892, it opened for the first time to the public, and although it closed again in 1914, the museum opened once more in 2009, and it's now in the Anatomical Institutes building, alongside the museums of human anatomy, anthropology, and ethnography, and also, for some reason, the Museum of Fruit. I haven't visited the Museum of Fruit. I don't know what's in it, but I think next time I go, I must make an effort to go. Well, obviously, Lombroso's museum was one of the first places I visited in Turin, and it was an amazing experience, full of original, rather grisly exhibits, as well as a replica of Lombroso's study, and also his skeleton, which he left to the museum. They used to have his head floating in a jar because he left that to the university. But I don't know what's happened there, but it certainly wasn't on display when I went. There's a photograph of it, though, there on the left, head in a jar. That's Lombroso. I'm glad I didn't get to see it in the flesh, as it were, because I think it would have been too weird. But the museum is a serious place. It is a university museum, after all, and it tells the visitor anything they need to know, really, about the origins of criminology in general, Lombroso's theories and experiments, as well as some of the cases that he was involved in. And I was hugely inspired as a writer by what I saw in that museum. So here's an extract from the novel, just a short one, to give you a flavour. So from floor to ceiling were shelves packed with the most extraordinary artefacts. There was a selection of wax and plaster death masks propped up on a shelf as if they were ornaments, each carefully labelled with the name of the subject and the date of their execution. James peered into the empty, lifeless eyes of one and wondered what the subject had been thinking as the minutes ticked away towards the inevitable. Did he know that his image would be captured and exhibited for all to see, that it would be held up as an example of the features of a born criminal? Above the death masks were some jars of pickled brains and body parts which bobbed around gaily in the preserving fluid like ducks on a pond. Next to them were some samples of tattooed skin stretched onto frames. Lombroso gestured towards them. "Feel free to take a closer look, won't you?" James examined the skins gingerly, running his hands over them, feeling their dryness, like parchment. He looked closely at the intricate designs, now fading. He saw angels, serpents, the sun and the moon, the names of long-lost sweethearts, and even what looked to be a tarantula. For a moment, so lost was he in the artistry that he quite forgot that they were pieces of human skin. Once he remembered, he put them down quickly, as if touching them might infect him in some way. Well, there are, of course, many other museums in Turin, and I have drawn on at least 3 of them in my novels. Here we see the Museo Egizio in the Academy of Science, which features in both books. It was founded as long ago as 1824, and it's the oldest and second largest museum dedicated solely to Egyptian antiquities. The first, of course, is in Cairo. Well, it was refurbished and reopened in 2015. Obviously, because of the pandemic, it has been closed, but I think it is reopening now. You can take a virtual tour by going to the museum's website, and that's well worth a look if you're interested in Egyptology. And among its many exhibits, it holds 3 versions of the Book of the Dead, which you can see on the right there, as well as the canopic vessels of Wahi Bra, which once enclosed internal organs that were removed during the process of mummification. Well, you can imagine this is great raw material for a novelist, and I do refer to both of these artifacts in my second book, which has a professor of Egyptology as a character. Well, in the same building in 1888, when my book is set, would have been the Galleria Sabauda, which again features in the first of the books. Since 2012, it's actually been in the new wing of the Palazzo Reale, and it exhibits the royal art collections of the House of Savoy, which is one of the most important art collections in Italy, if not the world, with paintings by the Piedmontese school of the 14th, between the 14th and 16th century, Spanzotti, Ferrari, D'Alba, other examples, Lippi, Angelico, the Bellinis, Tintoretto, Caravaggio, and Gentileschi. So 2 museums that I loved, but I do think that my favourite is the next one, the Mole Antonelliana. This building was completed in 1889, and it was originally a synagogue. Now it's open to the general public. It houses inside, as you can see there, the most wonderful film museum. I mean, it really has to be seen to be believed. It's huge. There's a great central part where you sit and can watch a gigantic screen showing various films. And then it's surrounded by walkways that you can see in that picture, with lots of different exhibits of the history of film, both Italian and international, throughout the century. the building itself is over 530 feet. It towers above the city, really dominates the landscape. It's the tallest unreinforced brick building in the world. I think it still is. You can go up to the top of the tower, but this is in a glass lift, and it's not for the faint-hearted, I can assure you. So if you're a little bit worried about that sort of thing, you might not want to do it. But there are fabulous walkways around the tower, which gives you a spectacular view of the city. You can get a flavour from those photographs in the middle there of all that you can see. I actually could not resist setting the climax, if you like, of the City of Devils there. I won't say any more about it because you might want to read it, you never know. So yes, the Mole Antonelliana, a wonderful, wonderful building. Well, I've talked up to now about the official history of Turin, but there is more, a darker side. I hadn't appreciated quite how significant this aspect of Turin was, but there is a very, very dark side to this city. How did Turin get this dark reputation? Well, if you walk through the swirling mists, particularly in the autumn, along the banks of the River Po on on an autumn evening, it might give you a sort of hint, I suppose. The city is known for its fog, as I've said, but even more compelling evidence can be found in the city's esoteric history. It reveals why it's known as the centre of black magic and mystery. So for one thing, legend has it that the city forms part of two magical triangles on what is known as the 45th parallel. So you've got the white magic triangle with Lyon and Prague, and then the black magic version with London and San Francisco. A point then, Turin, a point where the Earth's energy currents intersect, allegedly, said to give Turin its air of mystery, as good and evil are perfectly balanced. And of course, it's also built where two rivers meet, the River Po that we've already seen, and the River Dora, which represent the sun and the moon, respectively. And apparently, this is where the Druids used to meet in ancient times as the summer solstice approached. Well, Turin is also reputed to be the location of the gates of hell. And it's said to be near a statue that's located in the Piazza Statuto. This and the surrounding area are known to some as the black heart of the city. And here, many years ago, the Romans would execute those who had been sentenced to death. Later, it was a site of Turin's gallows, and the condemned would be buried in a cemetery beneath the piazza and stretching to the streets beyond. Well, before they met their end, they would be given their last rites at the Chiesa della Misericordia in the nearby Via Barbaroux. And there you can still see a register of their names, the black hoods they were forced to wear, and the biturin, or small cup, from which they took their last drink, as well as the hangman's noose and crucifix. And by the way, speaking of executions, I am told that actually the guillotine, you might have thought that this was invented in France, but no, apparently it began in Turin, in the Piazza Carlo Emanuele II. From the early 1700s, a similar contraption was brought out whenever a capital case required it, and around 400 unfortunates literally lost their heads. The statue in the centre of the Piazza Statuto, the Monumento al Trafore del Freus, built by the Count Marcello Panisera di Veglio, is itself a sight to behold. At the top is an angel, you can see there with the star there. Angels are supposed to be lovely art and creatures, but this one is rather more malevolent than usual. Stares down at those who walk beneath with a rather hostile glare. And perhaps unsurprising if we learn that some would say, anyway, that his identity is actually Lucifer. Lucifer himself, guarding the entrance to hell. He wears a 5-pointed star upon his head, which is apparently the symbol of the Antichrist. Even the facts rather than the speculation are chilling. The statue was built in the 19th century, you see it down there bottom right, to commemorate those who died in the building of the Frejus tunnel that links Turin to the Alps. All the figures representing those who died are at the angels' feet, and there's a sort of, they're almost buried in the rock, their faces contorted in agony. And the angel points down at them in a gesture rejecting the spirits of those who are damned. Well, I visited this place, of course, and I decided to begin my novel here with a body being found. The actual gates to hell, well, you might need to wander around the piazza a bit to find them. They're not very obvious, and I haven't got a photograph of them because they're a bit of a letdown, really. They're not fine metal gates or devilish carvings. No, they are actually located underneath a metal manhole. So I didn't bother putting that up because we've all seen a manhole and we know what they look like. So it's not just about hell, though. The Holy Grail is thought to be buried in the city by some. It's supposed to be beneath the Chiesa Gran Madre di Deo, which you see there. There are 2 statues in front of the church. They are called Faith and Religion, and they are supposed to be connected to the prophecies of one of the city's famous former residents, Nostradamus. We'll say more about him in a minute, but you might think that the statues are unremarkable, but apparently their lifeless eyes are supposed to be staring, and the direction in which they are staring is supposed to be, or rumoured to be, showing us a path to where you can find the Holy Grail. If that's so, I wonder why nobody's found it to now. But, you know, that's just I don't know. Who knows? Well, other famous residents include Paracelsus, the alchemist, a doctor as well, of course. He's said to have hidden the Philosopher's Stone, which is a powerful talisman, in a secret location beneath the cities. There's lots of things being buried underneath in Turin. And it comprises, the location comprises 3 alchemical caves that are reputed to enable anyone who visited them to cross into another dimension. I'm guessing a few grapplers might have a similar effect, but it's just as well because nobody knows the location of these caves. They are said to be under the very fine Palazzo Madama, but again, no one's located them, so I have to put a question mark over that. Apollonio of Tyana, reported to be a wizard, an expert in the occult, is also said to be involved in these caves, as is Nostradamus. Nostradamus, of course, very famous for foretelling world events, lived briefly in what is now known as the Via Lesona in Turin. I think he was there for about a year to 18 months, something like that. And he supposedly left an inscription which holds the key to deciphering his prophecies. And it says, it's rather curious, it says, Nostradamus stayed here, where heaven, hell, and purgatory are. I am called Victory. He who honours me will be glorious. He who scorns me will be ruined completely. I have no idea what that means, and I don't suppose you have either. Later, it was apparently destroyed by fire, although some say that the piece of wood or whatever was secretly preserved. So somebody has it somewhere, apparently. I'm sure there's a novel in there if Dan Brown doesn't get there before me or someone else. But hell is not the only place with a doorway in Turin, because if you look carefully, you can also find your way to infinity. The entrance to which is located beneath the beautiful Angelica fountain in the Piazza Solferino. And there it is on the bottom of the screen. Not far from here is the Piazza Castello, and that is allegedly where the border between the holy and the satanic aspect of the city of Turin stands. Another door, top left, you can see there, is allegedly created by the devil. You can find it in the Via 20 Settembre, large, as you can see, with ornate wooden carvings. It apparently appeared overnight back in 1675, and it's said to be Satan's own handiwork. So he's pretty nifty with a bit of the old carving, isn't he? So, so you can actually still see that door if you wish. So what other aspects of supernatural Turin can I tell you about? Well, Lombroso was something of a ghost hunter. He set up several investigations into the paranormal throughout his career. And indeed, Turin has so many spirits, it's really hard to know where to start. But maybe the best place is beneath the city, where you can find a network of underground secret passages, cellars and catacombs at a secret citadel. It's a sort of enormous pentagonal fortress. Well, the tunnels are named after a young Italian soldier, Pietro Mica, who died while he was defending his city against the French in the siege of Turin in 1706. It all seemed hopeless, so he decided to blow up some gunpowder in order to make the tunnel collapse onto the enemy. Using a short fuse that he knew would kill him, he still carried on with his mission, and his spirit is said to haunt the tunnels still, valiantly beating his drum in an effort to warn his compatriots of the danger that lay ahead. So needless to say, I had to feature this in my writing. So our three detectives go down to the tunnels in pursuit of a killer, only to find, well, I don't want to give anything away. I'll give you a little flavour though. I'll read you an extract. Their lanterns flickered in the gloom as they made their way through the archways and brick-lined passages. There was no sign of anyone, although once or twice James thought he saw a figure in the distance. Tullio told them that it was just his own shadow on the walls ahead, but James was not so sure. And then they heard it, a soft, rhythmic drumbeat from what sounded like a few hundred yards away. They stopped to listen for a few seconds and then decided to follow the sound. Could this really be some kind of ghost? For a moment or two, it seemed as if they were all seriously considering the possibility. The tunnels were dark and atmospheric and seemed an ideal habitat for a spirit. They began running, for the sound seemed to be moving away from them. Then suddenly, there was an unearthly scream, shrill and terrifying, which stopped them in their tracks. There was a clatter, and then more darkness. James came to a halt, his fears so acute that he could barely move. Ottolenghi had dropped his lantern. Now the light was so dim that they could hardly see anything. James looked down at his own. It was dangerously close to going out. He had never encountered anything like this before. He felt as if his whole body was clenched with the tension. On went the drumming. It seemed to be getting louder, but was also moving away more quickly until it was difficult for them to keep up. It was not helped by the fact that they would occasionally get to a dead end and have to retrace their steps and make a turn. The drum beat seemed to change direction as if it was taunting them. On and on they went through tunnel after tunnel for what seemed like hours. Then Tullio came to an abrupt halt and put his fingers to his lips. Shh, listen, he whispered. The drumbeat had stopped as quickly as it had begun. There was what sounded like laughter, the sound of footsteps running, and then silence. So, Supernatural Turin 3, Lucidio Abbey. This building is found outside the city, quite some way. It's famous for a rather lurid past. Monks were excommunicated en masse in the 17th century from the abbey. The cause was rumoured to be the holding of various satanic rituals, conjuring up the devil, various spirits and demons, and they had to assist them some young girls from a nearby village. Quite who was corrupting who is unknown. Visitors to the abbey have, or so they have claimed, encountered various phenomena, including mysterious moving shadows and mists, strange lights and sounds, including weeping. In the crypt, some of the abbots were buried, sitting upright in a circle, and over the years, the bodies became naturally mummified. Legend has it that they are guarding the evil presence that haunted the place and corrupted all who came into contact with it. Well, as soon as I found out about the place, I knew I wanted to write about it, so I did. In this extract from the Devil's Daughters, which is my second novel, Lombroso, Ottolenghi and James Murray investigate some hauntings of an old abbey, which is, of course, based on this one. They got to their feet and began to move from room to room. James could not see much, even with his lantern, but that air of malevolence was still in evidence. As he approached the final room, tucked back right at the back, the feeling of dread overwhelmed him almost completely. He felt a draught blow around his head. The lantern flickered and then suddenly went out completely, plunging him into darkness. He felt frantically in his pockets for a match. It was difficult. His hands were trembling so much he could hardly hold anything steadily, but finally he managed to reignite his lantern and held it high. He gasped and stepped back. The lantern swayed precariously, casting strange shadows from the macabre tableau in front of him. Seated only a foot or so away from him, dressed in the monk's habits, was a row of bodies, strangely preserved, their heads drooping and their mouths hanging open. They seemed to be screaming. Well, this is just a selection of spooky locations in a very atmospheric city, but there are a whole host of other things to see, more museums, theatres, art galleries. So if you feel inspired to visit and its devilish side is a bit too dark for your taste, there are plenty of other diversions. Obviously be careful when you're walking around some of those piazzas at night, because you might bump into the devil on his way home. To hell through that manhole at the gates to hell. But rather than dwell too much on the dark side, I did want to finish on something a bit more positive, a positive aspect to Turin. It's food and drink, which is something I did also write into both novels. Turin is it's where solid chocolate was first made, so quite amazing I actually ever came home. Grissini, breadsticks, of course, originated there. Vermouth, as far back as 1786, when Antonio Benedetto Carpano transformed a herbal remedy into something far more palatable. I'm a bit of a foodie and aware of Turin's involvement in the slow food movement. So I took it on myself to conduct some very, very careful, detailed, serious research by eating and drinking in as many bars, cafes and restaurants as I possibly could. And this has, of course, continued over several visits and will begin again in earnest as soon as I can get back to the city. I'm very much hoping that my favourite haunts will still be there despite the pandemic and its lockdown. So a brief tour then of some of these places, many of which date back for over a century, and also the food and drink that feature in the book. So first of all, there are some fine historical cafes. Cafe Norman, Cafe San Carlo, Cafe Torino. As an example at the top there. And you can see that the decor, you could describe it as a little bit overblown, perhaps. You might think. Lots of red velvet, gilt, and comfortable seats. But the seats are just as well, because when you see a bill for the cup of coffee you've just drank, you will need to sit down. Cafe San Carlo was once a meeting place for the so-called patriots, the liberal opponents of the Conservatives. The Conservatives met in a different cafe, of course, during the Risorgimento and the years leading up to the Risorgimento. It was also apparently a famous haunt of Gramsci. The Cafe Torino was a favourite destination of all kinds of novelists and artists, Cesare Pavese in the 19th century, for one. Also the haunt of film star Ava Gardner in the 20th century. And all of these places in the evening serve snacks called stuzzichini, cheese, olives, bread with various toppings, free with your aperitivo. There are also more substantial dishes available in some places. This is part of the Torinese tradition of a pericena, something between a snack and a full meal. You pay a flat rate for your drink and you help yourself from the bar, basically. And it's a great way to socialise. An enterprising soul should, I hope they will, introduce it here if they haven't already, because I think it would go down very well. One of the oldest cafes in Turin, you can see there, Albiturin, and it's one of my absolute favourites. It's quite tiny, really. It's a tiny establishment. It dates back to 1763. It's got small marble tables in and outside too, of course. It serves the local speciality drink, biturin, which is coffee, chocolate, and whipped cream. So the whipped cream, you sip through the whipped cream, you sip the bitter coffee, and the chocolate is at the bottom as a lovely surprise. I can't recommend it enough. If you've never tried one, you really should. Enjoyed by Nietzsche, Alexandre Dumas, Puccini, and me, amongst others. Le Tre Galli and its sister restaurant Tre Gallini are both long-standing places to eat Piedmontese cuisine. Here's some examples. Finanziera, which is a stew made of chicken offal, including the cockscomb. I've tried it, it's very nice. Anchovies in a herb sauce there underneath it, which is lovely. And vitello tonato, which is a very famous dish. A dish of a thinly sliced cold veal smothered in a mayonnaise, tuna and caper sauce. And there you are. There you can see a photograph of it there. And the hands belong to my husband, actually. He was just about to dig in when I took the photo. And of course, risotto. Risotto is a dish famous from Turin, using rice from the rice fields of Piedmont, which surround the city. Here, of course, you can also try some of the region's beautiful wines: Barolo, Barbaresco, Dolcetto, Asti, Arneis, Gavi. You will find all of these dishes and the wine and more in my books. Not that I'm trying to sell them or anything. I hope you have enjoyed our tour around the city and that you'll agree that although Turin might be a city of devils in some aspects, it also has character, it has history, it has architecture, beautiful countryside, and wonderful food and wine. So it's very well worth a visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Grazie mille, Diana. You see, I call you Diana in Italiano. Thank you. If I'm going to stop the sharing now, and
then if I say stop share,
share,
that should do it, shouldn't it? There we are.
Grazie mille per questo, veramente interessante, una città bellissima, and that was really nice to see from, you know, from your experience, really, really interesting. I would like to ask if any of you know, our guests tonight would like to ask a question to Diana, make a comment perhaps. Just don't forget to unmute yourself and feel free to speak.
Hi. Yeah, just sorry. Just
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just a comment. Really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed that. I learned so much. I didn't know much about Turin at all. I only knew a little bit about Juventus and the cars. So it was great. So I enjoyed it. Just wanted to say that. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone would like to make a comment? Maybe
Luca, can I make a comment? Yeah. Just like to say that was amazing, thank you. Diana, where did you get the first idea from for this? Because I can see that you come from a criminology background, but how did you come across an Italian criminologist? I think I might have missed that little bit.
We teach sort of chronological history of criminology, and so we tend to start with Lombroso, and students, they liked it because of all the crazy theories that he had. And so it was as I said earlier, it was in a seminar. One of the students asked me a question, and it kind of planted a seed in my mind. And I read about him, and he just seemed an ideal candidate to be a character, and so did Turin, of course.
Thank you.
How did you come to know Turin?
Sì, Silvia, say it again a bit louder, Silvia.
I would like to ask, how did you first, you like Turin very much. How did you start and how did you develop this relation you have with the city?
My relationship with Turin, well, it began just with a research visit in the rain, mostly, but the city, it grabbed hold of me right from the beginning, and so many things happened. I just remember on one occasion we were just been out for dinner, and we walked a little way from the restaurant on the way back to the hotel. We turned a corner, and there was an enormous orchestra in the middle of a piazza playing Beethoven. And that sort of thing can only happen in, I don't know about Turin, but certainly in Italy. It was just wonderful, and it was so unexpected. And of course we sat down and had coffee and cognac and watched this wonderful music being played. It's such a cultural city. So it grabbed my heart really from that aspect, and I've been several times, and I've actually I've made a friend with a professor, Esterino, from the university. So I've done some teaching at Turin University, and I've been to a conference, and Esterino has actually he's analysed my books, and so I went to a lecture he gave, a paper at a conference where he analysed my writing, which is rather strange because he came up with all sorts of things I'd never thought of, which is a very odd experience, but lovely. I've met people there, and I just fallen for it completely. So I can't wait to go back. It's the last time I went was in 2019, and so I'm really looking forward to a repeat visit, to see friends, and to just experience the city and explore even more, because there's so much that I've really scraped the surface, I feel. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Grazie Silvia, grazie Diana. Abbiamo una domanda. Feel free just to unmute yourself. I think I want the lady, so I don't know your name. If you just unmute, just take the microphone. I'll ask to unmute. and then I've got, I think, Paul and Janet next. Can you just yeah.
Me.
Yeah,
Oh, hello, Diana.
Hi, Maureen. How lovely to see you.
Two friends and I, there's three of us, we got a takeaway from the pub across the road, a bottle of red wine, and we've really enjoyed listening.
Thank you very much.
So
I hope the wine was Italian.
nice bottle.
We drink any old red wine, really.
Shame on you.
We really, really enjoyed it, so thank you.
My pleasure.
Molto bene, grazie. I think got a question from Paul. See, Paul, just unmute yourself, Paul. See. Okay, prego.
Hi there. Like everybody else, really enjoyed it. Whenever I read Donna Leon, you know, with Inspector Brunetti, I love the sense of place that it captures, and I'm sure you do it and have the same kind of level of knowledge of Turin as he has of Venice. But I'm always intrigued at the lack of a kind of a moral final outcome in Brunetti's stories, and to a certain extent also in the Montalbano stuff. And there seems to be an underlying assumption in some Italian crime literature that there are levels of criminality that you just can't access. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think it probably is, because when you encounter evil on a certain level, what can you do? There cannot be any redemption. There has to be just a kind of readjusting of morality, so perhaps that's why. I don't think it's a particularly Italian thing. I think it's a general thing. I mean, usually crime fiction will finish with the killer or killers or the evildoer being brought to justice or suffering in some way. And my books are no different, really. I think they're perhaps more traditional in that way than Donna Leon and her books, and I'm not sure. Maybe also you could say that about the others, but yeah, I don't know. I just think, but there is a certain level of badness that you can't explain. So you just have to say, right, well, you know, they're gone. That's it. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Paolo, sì, va bene. Perfetto, molto bene, grazie. Thank you very much for that, for the question as well. Anybody would like to make any more comments on? Thank you also for sharing some of the comments on the, on the chat. Thank you very much for that.
Gianluca?
Sì, prego.
May I ask a question of Diane?
Yes, is it David?
It's David Bell, yes. Thank you very much. I've not read your books, but I certainly have the intention of doing so now. And I wonder why you chose to use a Scottish doctor as your vehicle for the investigation. Is there a connection there somewhere?
Oh, I think you've got it. Well done. If you have, yes, there is a connection. It's Arthur Conan Doyle. He was very interested in the forensic side of things, in investigation of crime, of course, as you know, with the Sherlock Holmes. And so I wanted to make that connection. I love Sherlock Holmes, and I really wanted to make a connection with that. So yes, James Murray. I mean, he's a useful character also because he's a visitor. And so he can come in and he can ask questions, he can describe what he sees, because this is all new to him. And so he's also a useful character to have in that sense from a writer's point of view. But also, yes, I did want to bring in the Conan Doyle aspect. And in fact, criminology was very much an aspect of Scottish intellectual thought in the 19th century. So sort of centre of criminology too. So I thought, you know, that was a kind of nice parallel to draw, really.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Diana.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, from a criminological aspect, how Lombroso distinguished prostitutes from, quotes, normal women.
Yes. Well, he was very rude. He's very rude about women generally. He would say that women were not evolved as much as men. So that went down very well. And he would also, so he would say that a prostitute was the exception, because obviously she would have to be presumably have a certain level of attraction to ply her trade. So he would say that they were an exception, but they were not normal because they were criminals. So that's the distinction. I mean, he got into all sorts of trouble with his theories, because, you know, he would say something and write about something, and then, you know, somebody would sort of question it and say, yes, but hang on a sec, that doesn't really make sense. And he would just sort of brush over it. It's a bit like Boris Johnson, actually. I'm just thinking about it. There's some certainty there. But yes, he would just sort of brush over it and answer a different question. So yeah, I mean, he had some very strange ideas, and although I suppose the most important thing to think about Lombroso is that even though his ideas are a bit odd, I mean, he was a man of his time, so they fitted in really to what people thought about things then. But also he was somebody that was a pioneer. So before him, people had spoken about crime and thought about crime and why it happened and who did it and who committed crimes and the reason for that. But they had done it as part of other subjects. It was Lombroso that created criminology. He created the study of crime. And not only that, but was the first person who actually bothered to look at women and crime as a separate subject, and in fact wrote a whole book about it. And he was the first person to do that. So although his ideas are slightly strange, and certainly from a modern eye, he was an important and influential thinker, because he's influenced everything that's come after that, and so created this science, this view of criminality. So he's an important guy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, David. Grazie, Diana. Have you got any more comments or questions for our speaker tonight? Okay. Okay, Diana. I can only say grazie mille. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for
Grazie.
very, very interesting talk. And on behalf of everybody here tonight, I would like to wish you good night, wish to all of you a good evening, and we look forward to see you our next talk. Okay? Grazie mille di nuovo. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you.
Bye. Arrivederci.
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 Buonanotte. Thank you, Diana. It was really enjoyable. Yeah. Really enjoyable. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you.
We went to Turin for a day.
Yeah.
Oh yes, Luca said yes.
Exactly, because we went for with a couple of friends actually in 2019, in May 2019. So it was actually 2 years ago. We went for a wine tour in a beautiful city of Alba.
Mm.
And then, you know, amazing. And we're very lucky to visit Turin for the day. But after the talk tonight, we definitely want to go back again now. And
I'm hoping I've encouraged lots of people to visit, because it's a wonderful place.
Wandered down the palisaded walkways, and there's so many little booksellers everywhere.
Yeah. Oh yes, yes.
We just came across a really gorgeous little place, and it was so old, with all the little plates in the window. and it was the best, one of the best meals, but so simple.
I'm very, very encouraged to visit. It seems to have been a city, one of the cities that I've just missed out completely. I know.
Yes,
that,
I think that's a lot of people would say that. Yes, yes, it's
know
not
that,
well known as a tourist destination, which of course makes it nicer because it's not sort of massively crowded like Florence or other places, you know.
I've been very lucky. I've been there 3 times with Jamba, and Jamba's sister-in-law is actually one of the city guides.
Ah, well,
and I'd love to go back. Lovely city, small enough to be intimate, but
yes, yes.
I know the motorways around it quite well. That's
yes.
It made me laugh about the manhole cover though, which is the gates of hell, because you sort of think, when they've got any work to do they draw short straws? Who goes down?
It's true.
Hate to think.
They're like, no, you go, no, you go. I went last time.
Ok. Ok, buona serata. Alla prossima.
Grazie Gianluca, grazie Diana.
E voi. Ci sentiamo per email con calma, Sandra.
Certo, certo.
Alla prossima.
ciao.
Ciao, arrivederci. Nice to see you. Hope to see you soon again.
Thumbnails get bigger.
Right, thank you, Diana. I think it was very
Your
enjoyable.
cat had a very good start role.
Yeah, the cat actually was going, you know, sometimes I've seen during the lesson as well. It's the best spot in there.
Oh, yes. She knows how to get comfortable.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I loved it. And
really
the museum actually, obviously quite macabre, but quite fascinating.
Yes. Oh, it's a brilliant, brilliant place. And actually, it's not too prurient. It's not sort of, you know, silly because it's in the university and they take it very seriously. It's not like that. I mean, it's just fascinating.
In Sardinia, in Cagliari, where Luca is from, there's a medical one, which is quite famous, and that's linked with the university, the medical side. And the amazing waxworks and figures. We've not actually been